Good tactical gameplay in D&D comes from having lots of interesting decisions the player needs to make before the end of their turn. Good decisions come in many forms, but my favorite is the dilemma, where the player has to choose one of many good things or has to choose one of many bad things. But how do we accomplish that in our D&D combat? That's where risks and hazards come in. By the time you're done watching this video, you'll understand how to use risks and hazards effectively on your battlefields in order to make both tools and complex decision points for both player characters and monsters. So what exactly is a risk or a hazard anyways? Risks and hazards are environmental things that pose threats to player characters and or monsters. I use the term risk to describe a bad thing that might happen, but also might not happen. And I use the term hazard to describe a bad thing that is guaranteed to happen. Hazards are things like acidic gas or slime on the ground, a wall of fire in the player's way. These are the sorts of things where if you go into the hazard, you are guaranteed to suffer some sort of negative consequence. Risks include stuff that let you make skill checks or saving throws to avert the bad side effect of going into the designated area. Things like gouts of fire, or traps, or any number of things slipping and falling down. The key part is that a risk is a gamble. Okay, so that's what a risk or a hazard is, but how do we use them effectively to make more interesting combats? Generally speaking, I keep my hazards minimally punishing, and my risks I get a little more dangerous with. The way I see it, if your risk and your hazard are equally punishing but the risk just has a chance to not happen, that makes the risk kind of just like a lightweight hazard. Besides, the whole point of a risk is a gamble, so set the stakes high. Something really awesome in exchange for a chance at something really bad. Meanwhile, if the hazard is going to be something the players can guarantee will happen as soon as they step in, and you want them to go in there at all, you're going to need to make it something that they're willing to weather, and that they're willing to suffer in order to get whatever you've put on the other side of it. Downside of a risk or hazard doesn't have to be damage. It could be a status affliction, a magical curse, it could be a new mechanic that you've introduced, maybe it's fright, or rage, or disadvantage from some source. The key point is that whatever it is that's on the other side of having paid the price or failed the risk, it's got to be bad for the players. The key to using a risk or hazard effectively to design an interesting combat is to make it a real decision. Nobody wants to make a bad decision. If there's just a bad spot on the battlefield that's in the way, nobody's going to go there. That's not actually a decision point, it's already made. So instead, you need to give the player a reason to consider suffering that consequence so they can actively decide whether or not they want to suffer the risk or hazard. You do this by putting something the players want on the other side of having suffered. Basically, consider risks and hazards to be the price tag on an advantage. My absolute favorite way to do this is to allow the players to take advantage of a monster's classic weakness, but only if they're willing to risk the hazard or risk in order to pull it off. For example, if the party is fighting monsters that are weak to sunlight, you could put a window that could be shattered. But in order to shatter it, the players have to expose themselves to a hazard or a risk. Another classic way to use risks and hazards on the battlefield is to create that fast and risky versus slow and safe decision. This is best used when you combine it with difficult terrain. If you're interested in what difficult terrain is, I have a whole video about that right up there, right? Bing! You basically make one lane with difficult terrain and one lane with a risk or a hazard, and let the players choose which lane they want to take. Ultimately speaking, you're hoping to make the decision of, do I play it safe and give the enemy a whole nother turn, or do I take the penalty of going through the risk and hazard, but deny my enemy the turn to escape? Okay, so if those are the simple ways to use risks and hazards, what can we translate them to into the game world of the characters as opposed to just on our tactical battlefield design? This is the fun part. Literally anything. Except pillows. Or cuddles. Or candy. Well, no, candy is pretty risky, you get cavities. Pits, acid, fire, lava, lightning, zappy, bleh, slippery ice, caldrops, avalanches, mudslides, riptide currents, lima beans. Okay, so that's risks and hazards, but what are some more complicated deviations we can take from this basic idea? Well, a risk could be something the GM could specifically set off when he wanted to, but only if it's been recharged, which is randomized, much like a dragon's fire breath. You could also have your risks and hazards do things that aren't bad for the players, but are good for the bad guys. Buffs, heals, morale boosts, whatever. You could even have them impact bigger environmental shifts that cover the whole battlefield that could sway the tide of battle this way or that. Finally, you could have your risks and hazards actually be kind of like interactive versions of other terrain, like a fake wall that vanishes temporarily, giving the players the chance to get shot by all the archers on the other side. Alright, so you take a risk or a hazard and you put it between the player characters and the thing that they might want, so they can determine whether or not they want to power through the risk and hazard to get the good thing, or play it safe and not even have to risk the downside at all. Ever seen a dungeon master use risks and hazards to great or tragic effect? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'm EvilSqueegee. I'll catch you guys later. Adios. The low market lies hidden from the city's knowledge, buried deep beneath layers upon layers of rock and dirt, lost within the depths of the maze-like sewers. It is here that you and your companions make a good living. Consider all the names you've learned, scribbled on wooden signs hanging over the various booths and stalls. Instagram is always looking for baubles and trinkets of any kind. As long as they're made of some kind of precious metal or crystal with some kind of valuable gem, she'll pay up. Twitter is constantly shouting, seeking rumors of details of ancient adventure sites. You yourself have had quite a few successful ventures at his suggestion. And then there's Facebook. Facebook. If you're ever looking for a good argument about whether this is worth 5 or 10, there is no better place to turn. It's a never-ending debate, that one. GameWisp is still there as well, perpetually offering rewards for a modest fee. Seems to be all the rage among adventurers as of late, but you have yet to settle on whether or not to spend your hard-earned coin on things like parties or exclusive games. All these sites and more are home now. You heave a sigh of relief, finally starting to relax, when suddenly, shouting erupts from all directions. The watch has arrived, the guards are here, you're still carrying your ill-gotten haul of loot and treasure. It'll slow you down if you try to run. What do you do?